It transports almost 100 times more water than the rivers of the world combined. The Gulf Stream. As part of a network of ocean currents that span the world, the Gulf Stream brings warmth from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the outer edges of northern Europe. It follows the eastern coastline of the United States until turning to cross the Atlantic Ocean at Newfoundland, Canada. Along the way, it brings bountiful catches to fishermen on both sides of the Atlantic and delight to gardeners, from France to Great Britain and all the way up to the Arctic Circle. Ever more oceanographers, physicists and marine biologists are turning their attention to the ocean current. How is the Gulf Stream being affected by global warming? Is it becoming weaker? And to what effect? The Gulf Stream's origins lie just off the coast of Cuba, not far from the country's capital, Havana. On the Malecon, the seaside promenade, the changes occurring in Cuba aren't yet really all that noticeable. The old town has barely changed since 1950, when Ernest Hemingway came here to drink, fish and write one of his most famous works. Hemingway set out for the Gulf Stream from the small port of Cojimar, just like the fisherman in his novella The Old Man and the Sea. After the revolution, the right to fish in the Gulf Stream was reserved for the state. Since 1990, private fishing is also permitted on the ocean's great current.
El Golfo para nosotros es la vida de todos nosotros los pescadores. Si hay poca corriente, hay poco pez, porque él fluye a través de la corriente. Y la familia de nosotros se alimenta de esas pescas. Sin corriente no podríamos ser pescadores. Es todo para nosotros.
When he wasn't busy writing, Hemingway would set sail for the Gulf Stream in search of the big game of the marine world: marlin, sharks, swordfish. Since then, a lot has changed in the oceans.
Puede haber sido el cambio climático, a través de los años ha ido disminuyendo las capturas, la cantidad de especies, las temporadas son invariables. Lo mismo antes en invierno se cogían peces blancos, ya ahora casi acabándose el invierno. Es decir, que ha cambiado el sistema.
The Gulf Stream is fed by the South Equatorial Current, which brings warm water into the Gulf of Mexico. There, the stream warms up to 30 degrees Celsius before it leaves the Gulf through the straits between Cuba and the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys, a chain of more than 200 coral islands, separates the Gulf from the Atlantic. The most southern island is Key West. The Gulf Stream passes close to the tip of the island. For Paul Menta, the climatic conditions in Key West are perfect. He wants to capture the flavor of the Gulf Stream.
Well, here we have a really strong current out there, and I need a lot of salt. And this water, with this current moving, we have a real high salt density here because of what goes on our island. Also, fresh water, we don't have any. It's 160 miles away, and it costs a lot of money. And we have this big ocean, and it's free and has a lot of good salt, so I want it for my barrel.
Paul Mentor is a kite surfer, fisherman, cook, and businessman. His latest business venture involves Demerara cane sugar, or rather, what you can make from it, with the help of the Gulf Stream.
For us, the Gulf Stream dictates all of our weather pattern here. Because we're in a specific condition, we're on a very tiny island with all this weather pattern and currents going around us, creating different things. You can't duplicate what we're doing. You could make something close, but you would have to have this huge stream of current, this big river out there to make it. We don't even know what it's doing. We don't understand it, but all we know is it's making conditions and making flavors come out of our rum that we can only get here, that I can't get when I'm in Colorado. So I'm learning every day.
The Florida Keys are connected by the 42 bridges of the Overseas Highway. They also separate two bodies of water.
Right smack in the middle right now. Back there's the Gulf of Mexico. Over here is the Atlantic, so right now we're right in the middle, so we're gonna split out and head off into the Atlantic.
After a good half hour, the three reach the Florida Stream, as the section of the Gulf Stream where it leaves the Gulf of Mexico is called.
Because he came up on his side.
Like a bass?
Yeah.
Where the warm water of the stream hits the cold deep water, nutrients rise to the surface. This attracts fish and creates a food chain.
Oh, get the net.
You can see a line. It's going to be curvy and it's never going to be in the same place. So we look for that line. So all of a sudden when we're coming across, it's going to look very green. And then there's a big definitive, boom, blue, which comes from the Florida current. And then of course we're looking for the weed line to come together and to see all those little fish on there. And then that's our sign, that we can fish in that spot. Or you'll see a lot more the frigate bird going around and looking for something to get. If you see him, he's a better hunter than we are. So you kind of trust the frigate bird once he starts to make a circle.
In the old days, the fishermen used to cast their hook only for the most expensive fish all year round. Nowadays, in order not to endanger the individual species, they fish only what is currently in season. The initiative in the Key West that local menus should fit the season was begun by Paul Mentor. He has formed a cooperative that connects fishermen and restaurants. A load of mutton snapper has just arrived.
You think about what the Gulf Stream is doing is that current's moving, it's breeding all sorts of little babies in the mangroves and bringing all these different fish in. And then they're recirculating. They're going over by Cuba. They're going up. Sometimes they leave and then come back. They start out like this, and they come in this fishery like this, and then they return like this. So it's an interesting cycle. It's very unique that we have here because we can have the Gulf and the Atlantic working with this Florida current to give us, this kind of bounty.
The blackfin tuna is for the restaurant next door. The stoned crab serves crab and the fish of the season, or whatever the chef Paul Mentor feels like cooking. Today, Creole style with black beans. To tickle out that special Key West flavor, Paul Mentor distills his rum 6 times.
When the distillers came from Barbados and Antigua, they tried this and went, wow, it's different, it's really different. And then we have the barrels with the salt cured product, the dark. They were like, wow, this is Key West, you have your own flavor now. For sure the Gulf Stream's in here, it's just more of a vapor instead of a liquid that you see.
The Gulf Stream flows closely along the Florida Keys for almost 200 kilometers before it passes the popular beaches of Miami. Ocean currents are driven above all by the force of the wind, but they don't flow in the direction of the wind. Their direction is influenced by the Coriolis force resulting from the Earth's rotation. Up to 100 kilometers wide and 300 meters deep, the Gulf Stream flows along the islands and lagoons of the Florida coastline. In one of these lagoons, Gulf Stream history was written 50 years ago. The largest research expedition ever undertaken into the great ocean current began at the Palm Beach Inlet. A 6-man crew, headed by the Swiss adventurer and oceanographer Jacques Picard, took to the sea on July 14, 1969. The man responsible for safely navigating the submarine Ben Franklin was Captain Don Casimir.
Well, I was in the Navy, in Navy submarines, and I had finished my qualifications for command at sea. I was reading in a magazine about this submarine they were building in Switzerland to study the Gulf Stream, and I thought that would be very interesting. And I applied for the job, and I was the perfect guy because I had the experience they wanted. Qualified for command at sea in a submarine.
When they departed, Jacques Picard and his research team had no idea how long their Gulf Stream adventure will take.
Picard was a very, very charming man, very bright, very intelligent, an interesting person to talk to and to work with. And we worked well together. You know, one thing about working in a submarine with 6 people for 30 days, you have to be nice to everybody anyway because you don't want any trouble. So everybody was particularly easy to get along with.
The Ben Franklin drifted with the current for almost 2,500 kilometers and revealed important insights into the physics of the previously largely unexplored Gulf Stream.
The boat was neutrally buoyant for a certain depth, and it stayed on that depth exactly, you know, like within inches. And all of a sudden, well, kind of gradually, it started to go down. And over a period of a half hour, we dropped 200 feet. Everybody's saying, what's going on here? And we looked around to see if we were taking on any water, if there were any leaks. Nothing. And about a half hour later, it started to go back up again. We couldn't figure it out. Well, the explanation I was given was the Gulf Stream is warm water moving rapidly. And off the coast of Carolina, you had cold coastal water. And they're rubbing against each other, and that shearing action causes these waves.
Aside from the physics, the researchers also studied the biology of the Gulf Stream. At over 300 meters below sea level, a world straight out of a Jules Verne science fiction novel revealed itself.
They're looking out, and there's 2 swordfish, and they look angry. And the guy's looking out the viewport like this, and a swordfish comes right at him with the sword. Bang! Bounces off, of course, and that was the end of that, but it seemed like the swordfish are afraid of nothing down there.
While Don Casimir was traveling the Gulf Stream, the first humans also landed on the Moon. Apollo 11 and the Ben Franklin Two missions that wrote history exactly at the same time.
It was a great thrill for me because it was something nobody had done before. It was very ambitious, very scientific, very interesting, and when we came into New York, you know, we got the fruits of that trip. It was fun. It really was.
On its journey, the Gulf Stream must swerve past one coastal promontory after the other. This churns up nutrition-rich water, attracting marine mammals, fish and water birds in search of food. A species of turtle also seems to have a mysterious connection with a warm current. Every summer, endangered loggerhead sea turtles come to lay eggs on the shore of Melbourne Beach. A group of scientists led by Kate Mansfield make sure that the turtles remain undisturbed and also collect research data.
The nest will sit on the beach for anywhere from 40 to 70 days, after which the little hatchlings will hatch out of the eggs and crawl down the beach into the water. They will swim like crazy for the first 24, 48 hours like little wind-up toys, and they'll encounter the Gulf Stream, which is just about 10, 15 miles offshore of here.
Young loggerheads let themselves drift amidst drafts of sargassum brown algae in the Gulf Stream. Little more is known about them.
Yeah. Some of the biggest questions regarding sea turtles in general include where the turtles go during their first years at sea. From the time that they leave the nesting beach as tiny little hatchlings, they'll be about half the size of my palm. They'll return many years later as larger juveniles, but in that in-between period, it's otherwise known as the lost years because we don't know what happens to them.
During the nesting time, Kate Mansfield uses a beach house to coordinate the research. She's already discovered some new findings about the lost years.
It's part of a long-term study where we're starting to piece together what turtles, young turtles are doing in different ocean basins. So this is a loggerhead. We released it here off of South Florida, and it followed the current almost all the way to the Azores over here. So this turtle traveled close to 4,500 kilometers in 220 days, so pretty quick.
Today, in the nearby Indian River Lagoon, a nature reserve, Kate and her assistants are fishing for young turtles. If an eagle ray happens to fall into the researcher's net, it too is promptly measured.
Sea turtles are endangered and threatened globally. They are mostly endangered, critically endangered, depending upon the species. So on the conservation side... We got a turtle over here. Yeah, do you mind if we deal with turtle? Oh my God, you're so cute. You are cute.
This loggerhead turtle has been underway for at least 10 years and has perhaps just returned by way of the Gulf Stream.
I think what fascinates me most are the questions that still remain regarding a lot of aspects of the sea turtle life history. Where they go when they're young of the year, when they're offshore, how they interact with their environment, how many survive. And because these animals are very long-lived, late-maturing species, and they spend time in habitats that are thousands of kilometers apart. It's really difficult to study them, so it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, just to get some basic biological information.
Species like the loggerhead turtle take advantage of the power of the Gulf Stream for their journeys. The water mass and constant flow rate of the Gulf Stream also make the current interesting for people. At the Harborside branch of Florida Atlantic University in Fort Pierce, the final preparations are underway. A new generation of turbine rotors is going to be tested. The engineers are part of an ambitious Gulf Stream project. They want to generate energy from the flow of the water.
And then for the other test, putting it in the water on Wednesday then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you imagine all of the freshwater rivers in the world and their discharge into the world's oceans, you multiply that by 30 times, and that's how much water flows by our shores every second here. So you can imagine that there's a significant amount of power that's available. The U.S. Department of Energy did a study, and they determined that 163 terawatt hours per year could be extracted from the Gulf Stream for power. You could power all of the households in Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina.
Can you see the other holes?
Water power stations could be set up wherever the Gulf Stream flows close to the coast. Right now, however, the miniature prototypes are still in the experimental phase.
The turbine, our research turbine, and the rotor for our research turbine we've been working on for about 5-6 years. This is the first opportunity that we'll have to actually collect some data about the rotor blades and how they perform. Yeah, we're very much looking forward to the results.
The carbon rotor blades are connected to a frame that is lowered from a boat into the water of the harbor test basin.
But you can still do that, but at least let me know. So if anyone sees anything out of the ordinary, if you hear something creaking or cracking, if you see something that you think is not right, that will possibly break or fail, please just call out and say stop, halt, or wait, anything like that, so that we all know that something's happening.
Once the rotor is in the water, the boat increases speed.
So little by little, we're simulating the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream on average is approximately 3 knots, and we're getting close to 3 knots now.
Now it's crunch time. Can the rotor prototype withstand the force of the Gulf Stream?
One of the parts that I'm really happy about is that there's nothing vibrating, nothing moving. It's really behaving very well. That's the first thing we look for in the structures.
What the Gulf Stream turbines will eventually look like and how they are going to be attached to the ocean floor is still open. It's going to take quite a while before the great river in the sea actually begins yielding energy.
Eventually we'll be able to see the day when our efforts now can turn into electricity coming to shore from turbines, not just here in the Gulf Stream, but around the world in other currents like the Kuroshio, the Agulhas in South Africa. Each continent has a current like the Gulf Stream, which could potentially be used for electricity.
The Gulf Stream grows larger as it travels along the east coast of the United States. Off the coast of North Carolina, however, it narrows and, as a result, flows faster. Here, it reaches a speed of over 7 kilometers per hour. Off North Carolina, the warm Gulf Stream also runs into the cold Labrador Current. This results in vorticities, turbulences, and violent storms that reach deep into the interior of the country. The waters off North Carolina are dangerous for maritime traffic. The area off the coast is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. There are approximately 5,000 known wrecks here.
I grew up in the foothills of the mountains, and I started diving when I was 15 years old in a rock quarry. It was cold and there were just a few fish, but I loved it. And I was like what I call bitten by the diving bug, where I just needed to go diving. I was fascinated by it, and I went all over the United States, but my favorite place was wreck diving right here off the coast of North Carolina.
Fishermen and researchers on the East Coast have noticed that warm water fish are beginning to move northwards. Could this be related to changes in the Gulf Stream?
So today we're heading out of the inlet right up here. We're gonna hug the shore, and we're gonna be heading down to the wreck of the city of Houston. It'll take us about 3 hours to get there today. It sank in 1878. It was a passenger ship.
How did the ship sink?
The ship, it sank during a storm, and all passengers were rescued and survived.
Avery and her team are conducting long-term observations of 14 different wrecks.
Oh my God, thanks. They'll be collecting data on what fish we see on the wreck. They're going to record how many of them there are, how big they are, what types they are. They're also going to take photographs of all of the critters that are living on the wreck structure, and they're going to measure how complex the wreck structure itself is. All right, are you ready? Ready. Close, you ready? The warm water associated with the Gulf Stream moves from the south up towards the north, and it intersects with colder water associated with the Labrador Current. And this is really unique because it means that we can have species of fish and corals and sponges in our backyard in North Carolina that you'd see in the Caribbean, mixing with ones that you'd also see up north near Massachusetts or New York.
Each wreck is a unique oasis in the ocean. But the oases are changing. Tropical fish have always been found here, but are new species now showing up?
This wreck is at 100 feet underwater, and that's the point off the coast of North Carolina where we start to see lionfish. And lionfish are an invasive type of fish that weren't found in this area until about a decade ago. And the lionfish are really pretty. They have these red and orange and white spines, and they're venomous to divers, so you don't want to touch one, but they do find themselves here on this wreck a lot of the time.
Other tropical fish, like the butterfly fish, also now feel at home off the coast of North Carolina. The changing ecosystems are a consequence of the recent climate change.
That's awesome.
And 50 kilometers off the coast of North Carolina, the Gulf Stream is also involved.
Our team is trying to figure out right now how the warming water temperatures may influence the life that we see on these wrecks. And we don't know the answer yet, but we are trying to figure it out. And we wonder if part of it may be due to the changing currents, or if it's just solely driven by the water temperature that's associated with that.
60 kilometers from the coast, Philadelphia lies along the shores of the Delaware River. At the end of the 18th century, it was the capital of the United States. The city also holds a special place in the history of Gulf Stream research. Benjamin Franklin, a founding father of the United States and co-author of the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, lived here in Philadelphia. In 1731, Benjamin Franklin founded the first library of the United States in Philadelphia. The library company still exists today. Among the historic documents Jim Green is in charge of is one of the first ever written about the Gulf Stream. The author, Ben Franklin.
We started taking notice of it on his first trip to England in 1720s, just looking over the edge of the boat and seeing the different kinds of seaweed and the different color of the water and that sort of thing. And as the Postmaster General of British North America, he proposed that the British packet ships should know about it so that they could take advantage of it and make their return trip from North America to Britain a week faster.
Working together with the captain of a whaling ship, Franklin created his first map of the Gulf Stream.
So this map that Franklin had printed in Paris was not really very widely circulated, but when he got back to Philadelphia towards the end of his life, he had his own American Philosophical Society publish his maritime observations with a chart that was engraved here in Philadelphia, big information about the Gulf Stream, and also hands out the credit at where credit is due. He said, the Nantucket whalemen, being extremely well acquainted with the Gulf Stream, its course, strength, and extent, by their constant practice of whaling on the edge of it. If the whale was in the Gulf Stream and the whaling ship was outside the Gulf Stream, then they would lose the whale, who would go way ahead of them. So they had to be very careful about moving in and out of the Gulf Stream just as the whales did.
Sperm whales eat fish, humpback whales plankton. Both food sources are found in quantity along the Gulf Stream. Because of the value of their fat, whales were hunted mercilessly all over the world. In America, the harpooners were often Native Americans. Buddy Vanderhoop earns his money as a fisherman on the Gulf Stream. When it's too rough to go far out, he has the time to fish the small fry with his grandson off the coast. Buddy belongs to the Wampanoag tribe, as does the harpooner Tashtego in Herman Melville's classic novel Moby Dick.
All my great uncles, cousins, grandfathers, great-grandfathers there were all whalers. They went around the world catching whales. The Wampanoag Indians were the best whalers in the world, according to Herman Melville, who came to Aquina, which was Gay Head back then. They were just the best. They had a job to do. They wanted to get it done and get back to their families.
Commercial whaling has been prohibited since 1986. But the connection between the Wampanoag, the ocean, and fishing is still very much alive today.
See him? That's too little, but it's a pretty little fish, huh? We'll let him go and swim another day, so he can get big. He's a little beauty, isn't he?
I like him. Yeah, right.
Martha's Vineyard lies just off the coast of Massachusetts. It was one of the most important whaling islands of the USA. The clay cliffs of Aquina on the west coast of the island are sacred to the people of the Wampanoag. They alone should be the ones to touch the red clay. The bond between whales and the way and life of the Wampanoag is already found in their creation mythology.
The legend of Moshe has it that the legendary big Indian who was Moshe, he went out, waded out in the ocean, caught a whale, and smash it against the cliffs. That's why the cliffs are red. My tribal nation feasted on the whale that he killed on the cliffs here, and that's how he took care of the Wampanoag people that live in Aquina here. So.
Martha's Vineyard is a popular holiday spot for the prominent and well-to-do. Only the western tip of the island, Aquina, is still Wampanoag territory.
The little pieces, because only us Native Americans can take clay.
Ancient knowledge is passed on to the younger generations. Nowadays, the Wampanoag are a self-governing people who have revived their almost forgotten indigenous language. They proudly consider themselves as Native Americans. The recipe for clay-baked fish was handed down to Buddy from his forefathers, as was one or the other whaling story.
My great-uncle Amos Smalley started whaling when he was 15 years old. He shipped out to sea to go make his fortune for his family, and on his second trip he happened to stumble into the only white sperm whale that had been seen for many years, but nobody had ever harpooned it. It was a very smart whale. He hit him right in the heart. Normally when you hit a sperm whale, if you don't get a good shot on him, that sperm whale will sound and come back up and break your dory into a million pieces. That's how a lot of whalers died.
Including the whalers in the novel Moby Dick. But the risk was worth it. The valuable whale fat was used for lamps and candles.
A short whaling trip was 3 to 4 years, and they went as far as 8 years out there. So sometimes they'd come back in and they'd have 2 or 3 more children than they knew about. So, but anyway, that was whaling. A good way to make a great living.
Over the past few years, the fishermen of Massachusetts have noticed that the sea is changing. It is getting warmer. The Gulf Stream has no clearly defined borders. Thanks to satellites, we now know that it moves forward in whirls. Called eddies, these swirling currents loosen themselves from the mainstream and drift out onto the open sea or to the coast. Nowadays, scientists work closely with fishermen to study these eddies.
I think so. Last year in April,
It began in the summer of 2011. Lobster fishermen noticed strong currents and exceptionally high water temperatures. And their catches began to drop.
I was at a meeting with commercial fishermen, and they prodded me into looking at a lot of different types of data, including drifter data, that showed that the Gulf Stream had moved well north, maybe 200 kilometers north of its normal position, and was interacting with the edge of the continental shelf. And this had big impacts on their work because there were 4 or 5 knot currents that ended up causing them to lose a lot of lobster pots there.
Glenn organized the distribution of probes that the fishermen attached to their traps. Fishermen like Greg Mataronas help track the water temperature on the seafloor. The data collected reveals increasing temperatures.
From the beginning to the end there, that's a pretty big difference.
Yep, it is.
There. We've got the Gulf Stream influence that seems to be increasing there, but that's on an event-like basis there. But we have a long-term warming trend that we have to deal with.
To determine the surface temperature and salinity of the water, the oceanographer has brought a so-called CTD sensor with him.
It's very important to share our experiences because we're thinking about things, how the jet stream is changing, how the Gulf Stream is changing, how different storms might affect things, and they're seeing the day-to-day impacts in terms of the lobsters that they catch, in terms of the fish that they catch there. So it's very important to cross-compare our experiences.
We're out here every day, and the scientists just can't be. It's not financially possible. It's not possible time-wise. We're out here anyway, so if we're given the instruments to take this data, we can take it and add to the knowledge of what's going on with our world changing right now, right before our eyes.
This year, a cold spell has somewhat cooled down the warm water brought to the coast by eddies. But when it comes to the Gulf Stream out on the open sea, the oceanographer sees no reason to play things down.
I think there's a big controversy right now as to whether or not it's slowing down or not, and some people say yes and some people say no. I think it will retain its basic character there, but how it's influencing the continental shelf is changing, and also how the Gulf Stream may be affecting the atmosphere is also changing.
In the state of Massachusetts, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has been conducting marine research since 1930. Here, more than 500 scientists construct underwater vehicles and measuring instruments, or conduct basic research into the biology, chemistry, and physics of the oceans. Glenn's research area is Gulf Stream eddies.
There have been many more warm core rings that have been forming from the Gulf Stream. And these are large eddies. They can be 100 kilometers in diameter. And they frequently move along the edge of the continental shelf in recent years there. And they can have currents as strong as 2 meters per second there. So they can damage, for example, the lobster pots. We're actually following this warm core ring right here because we'll be going out in order to study these motions of the Gulf Stream waters affecting the continental shelf.
He will be out for 2 weeks. The Neil Armstrong is the newest and most modern of the 3 research vessels operated by Woods Hole. Research trips are very expensive, so the 24 researchers on board work in 2 shifts around the clock. Glenn is a physicist, but he's interested in the work of all departments. On this research trip, a newly developed high-sensitivity sonar is being deployed for the first time.
Yeah, but look at that right here.
The sonar emits acoustic pulses of different frequencies that echo back from the creatures and tectonic structures of the ocean. Layers of cold and warm water can also be precisely identified. This allows for a comprehensive overview of the underwater world. The scientists verify the accuracy of the sonar with the help of small mesh nets. They use the nets to fish in the areas where sound data has been collected. The catch is then compared with the recorded data, from baby sharks to zooplankton.
One thing I'm very excited about this cruise is seeing how the different frequency bands reflected different organisms, and you could actually see the interplay. You could see fish moving between different layers of zooplankton, and then similarly to see the influences of the temperature and those offshore flows on the patterns that are reflected in the sonar. And it was really the influence of these 2 eddies that increased the temperature over the outer continental shelf. The temperatures went from 8 or 9 degrees centigrade up to as high as 15 degrees centigrade. So that's a huge increase in temperature there.
Over the last 100 years, the Gulf Stream has warmed up by about 1 degree Celsius. Warmer water absorbs less CO2 from the atmosphere, which in turn contributes to global warming.
Thinking about the long run, there are big societal implications out of understanding what happens out here. One important thing is storms in the future. If the ocean warms up, the storms are likely to be stronger. They may possibly be more destructive. And that's one reason we need to keep an eye on the continental shelf and what happens here and how the Gulf Stream interacts with it.
Off the coast of North Carolina, the Gulf Stream has already turned towards the northeast to flow into the open Atlantic. Off the coast of the Canadian island of Newfoundland, the most eastern point of the Americas, the Gulf Stream gets close to the shore one last time. And this is also where it once again collides with its rival, the Labrador Current, which originates in the Arctic Ocean and gives Newfoundland a year-round cold, harsh climate. The capital of Newfoundland is the port city of St. John's. At the airport, a Hercules C-130 is being prepared to take off. Weather permitting, a drifting buoy is going to be dropped directly where the Gulf Stream and Labrador Current converge. The crew is under the command of Lieutenant Ryan Clark and belongs to the International Ice Patrol, an internationally funded organization run by the US Coast Guard.
So after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, there was the Convention for Safety of Life at Sea, which formed the International Ice Patrol, the mission we've had ever since. And since that time, no ship heeding an Ice Patrol warning has collided with an ice patrol.
Each reconnaissance flight covers an area as big as Austria and goes up to the 60th latitude, the northernmost perimeter of the shipping lanes. Lieutenant Ryan Clark coordinates the search for new icebergs from the cockpit. The images on the infrared camera show how cold the icebergs are and how fast they will probably melt.
The past 3 years have been very busy iceberg seasons with a large amount of icebergs entering shipping lanes. But it's important to note that over the last 100 years, there's been a large variability where we'll have years where there'll be over 1,000 icebergs in the shipping lanes and years where we won't see any icebergs in the shipping lanes. So right now, we're not ready to make an accurate statement about the impacts of climate change, but we are trying to figure that out as much as we can.
In the cargo hold, ice observers look for icebergs that might have been overlooked by the radar, and they monitor the movement of previously documented icebergs. This also provides important data about ocean currents.
Where the Labrador Current and the Gulf Stream meet, it's a very critical area where the two currents interact, because sometimes you might get an eddy and make it very difficult to try to guess where icebergs are going to travel. So for us, it's important to have real-time data in place, and that's why our buoy program is so important.
The buoy will supply even more data about the Gulf Stream, which from here crosses the Atlantic Ocean to surrender its warmth to the west coast of Europe. There, the Gulf Stream will travel past France to Great Britain and all the way up to the Arctic Circle, where evidence is mounting that the current is becoming weaker, with consequences for the climate.